Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 117 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, and today's episode is on 3 tips to help you stop procrastinating if you're depressed. Now, as always, I know this podcast is mainly focused on university psychology students and psychology professionals, but sometimes it's quite nice to hear it from what our clients are experiencing it, as we're focusing on that clinical psychology. And by learning what it feels like for our clients, then this can increase sympathy, and this can also help us develop a sort of higher level of understanding about what our clients are going through, so that we can help them and we can sort of sympathise with them a bit more. So that will be the focus of today's episode, because when you're depressed, then you really do procrastinate, you really do not want to do stuff. So it's all about breaking this vicious cycle, so that's very important, and we'll be looking at that in the content part of today's episode. And it is Friday the 22nd of October 2021 as I record this. So moving on to the psychology news section, we've been on the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and there are some very good ones here today. And the first one is the maybe favour. We are more readily committed to helping a stranger if we might not have to follow through. And of course, this always backfires from time to time. Imagine that a neighbour asks for a favour to help move some garden furniture at the weekend. Now imagine that instead they explained that they've lined up a friend to help, but that friend has become ill and that you'll be the only one required if they're not better in time. Rather than a firm favour, this second scenario involves what authors of a new paper dub a maybe favour, and they report we are more likely to agree to grant these favours than ones that we know for sure will have to come out good on. So this might not be surprising in itself, but the team goes to show that exploiting the maybe favour effect could have big implications for our society. So this one I think is very interesting because, let's face it, we know this is true. We've all done this before, though, but especially when it comes to helping strangers, because the thing about strangers is that we don't know them, we don't necessarily like them, but we don't want to seem bad at the moment. So we don't want to be bad and rejected, but saying that we might be able to help, doing these maybe favours, that can actually be quite beneficial to us. So that's something that's quite interesting. But as the team also goes on to show, that it could have massive implications for our society, because this does play into other topics like pro-social behaviour, social influence, group psychology. So very, very interesting, and let's hope there's more research done on this in the future. The next one is supportive male allies can make male-dominated workplaces less hostile for women. Despite much work to counter unequal workforces in science, technology, engineering and maths, stereotypes about who will succeed in science still abound, and some research suggests that these biases can actively put people off certain careers and fields. Other papers find that the competitive nature of STEM courses and those can be particularly damaging, leading to low feelings of belonging and subsequent low retention rates for minority groups. A new paper looks at the role of men in countering hostile environments, in particular how men can signal their support and respect for women colleagues. And for 3 studies, the team finds that supportive male allies help reduce feelings of isolation and hostility for their women colleagues, potentially offering a new way to combat inequality in STEM. So, as always, we do need to focus on these inequalities and these hostile work environments, because they're not okay, they are bad, and this is a problem that everyone needs to solve. Men need to help, women need to help, society levels, individuals themselves, groups, and so much more. So this is a very complex issue, but I truly believe that with every step we take, we're taking one step closer towards decreasing it. And this is just another step that will hopefully help us in the future. So hopefully by knowing that male allies are important now, research will hopefully turn to about how do we make men, or how do we increase the likelihood of men being allies, and how do we change men's attitudes that aren't allies towards the ones that are allies. But I have no idea if that made sense, but that's the sort of thinking that I think will be important moving forward, because this paper and this bit of research I think will be a basis to then build upon, as all the research is. Drinking to cope doesn't work, even when we believe it does, and this is the last one. Have you ever felt a little anxious or low and decided that a beer or glass of wine could help? If so, you're hardly alone. This exact thought process must play across the country every night of the week. There's been surprisingly little solid research, though, into whether alcohol does actually relieve these negative thoughts. Now, new work concludes that in fact it does not, and that people who drink to cope can even make their symptoms worse. So, there's not a lot to talk about in today's episode, but the most important thing here is just that, in all honesty, I would just say drinking just does not work, and there are better ways to solve whatever difficulties that you've got. Not official advice, but just drinking just does not work. And I don't drink, and basically there's nothing more for me to say on that topic, except that if we look at this in terms of clinical psychology, we would probably say that the drinking is a maladaptive coping mechanism, and as we know from clinical psychology, that it's the maladaptive coping mechanisms that we need to change, because that's the thing that's causing the difficulties for you and that sort of stuff. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So today I'm actually going to sort of skip the personal update, because this week I've mainly been focusing on placement stuff and fiction. So there's not actually been anything psychology related too much, except from the only thing that I've really been doing in my placement this this week is mainly in improvements in academic writing. So not very interesting, and definitely not worth talking about it on this podcast. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always tweet me on Twitter @sci-fi-whiteley, and you can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. I always love to hear from all of you, because it really does make the podcast feel more like a conversation, which I love. And today's episode has been sponsored by Clinical Psychology. So this is an absolutely brilliant book that will really help you develop a great understanding of clinical psychology, what it is, what it involves, the different therapeutic models, what population clinical psychologists work in, and then there's also a lot more surprising facts. For example, the different models of actually how to be as a clinical psychologist. For example, you've got the reflective practitioner, and then there are other forms of practitioners. So that's very interesting and so important. Because different countries emphasize different models of being a practitioner, so that's really critical. And then it also goes into using research and lots of other great pieces of information that I cannot stress enough. It's this book's really popular, and lots of people have found this book really useful, so I cannot recommend it enough. So that is Clinical Psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can also get the audiobook at all major audiobook retailers, and you can order the paperback, large print and hardback versions from Amazon, your local bookstore and local library if you requested. And then you can also get the ebook directly from me at payhip.com/connorwhiteley. And in case you don't want to buy a book, but you still want to show a bit of support and love for the podcast, then you can now buy me a coffee. Yes, this is a bit of one-time support that's really easy to use. And if you want to do that, please go to buymeacoffee.com/connorwhiteley. So let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about 3 tips to help you stop procrastinating if you're feeling depressed and sad. And in today's episode, I wanted to come away from mainstream clinical psychology and the whole mainstream idea, and I wanted to do something that might benefit you, you as the listener, whether you're a psychology student or a psychology professional, because depression is part of life. And please remember, there's a difference between major depression and depression, because of course major depression is the diagnosable condition. Depression, that's sort of the part of life, and it can last a few hours. So if you're experiencing any sort of depression, then this might be a really great, really useful episode to help you. So now we're going to look at these 3 tips. Switch up your priorities. When you're depressed or upset, you you really do not feel like doing certain tasks, and you don't always have the energy. So you need to break the cycle of procrastination. And one way to do this is by switching up your priorities. For example, I remember a very distinctive time after my first driving lesson after the first lockdown here in the UK, and it went badly. It went badly. It really did. Because I hadn't driven for months upon months, and it just really did not go well. It was quite horrific, and I actually made myself ill because of it. Yes, that was just really bad though, because I had a terrible headache, and it cost me an evening of my life. So I was hardly impressed. Anyway, so as I was becoming ill and extremely sad with myself, and I was home alone, I needed to do some basic life things. Also, though, I do need to take the opportunity to remind you that for depressed people, even getting out of bed can seem impossible. So me saying that I needed to do these basic life things, it sounds easy, but in that mindset, it really wasn't. So I really did just want to lay down on my bed and just, oh no, it was just awful. Furthermore, I knew I was basically depressed and I was starting to get a headache, so I made sure that I did some stuff like making myself some dinner. But normally I would do like some other stuff first, and then I would make my dinner, and then I would manage to break the cycle of procrastination. Overall, when you're feeling depressed and sad, whether it's because something has happened at university or work, try to break the cycle by changing up your routine and priorities. For example, exercise before you go to work or university, or vice versa, if that's part of your routine. Take another route to your goal. I remember when it was getting towards the end of my first university term, and surprise, surprise, a group project was going wrong. As you all know, I really do not like group projects. So I was so annoyed and depressed about it because I didn't want to fail or do bad at my first major project at university. Yeah, I knew I had to try and fix the situation, but I was so depressed and I was so annoyed by it all, I just could not face it. Therefore, another tip is to take another route to your goal, and what this means is to do something else that will break the cycle of procrastination. Then by the time it's finished, you should have some energy and concentration to finish the goal that you've been avoiding. So whilst I do completely forget what I ended up doing for my first project, a few nights ago there was a health-related situation, absolutely nothing serious, I promise. And when I wrote and also when I record this blog post, it's basically just that I had some really bad eczema and I'm still suffering from the side effects. But everything should be under control right now. And it made me lose all focus and interest in writing a fiction that night. So instead of entering a cycle of procrastination, because I really wanted to write the story that I was planning to, I switched over to another task. So I wrote some non-fiction instead. So whilst that's a very specific example to me and to my life, the point is that whenever you feel down and enter a cycle of depression, you can break it by doing something else and returning to the goal later. For a university student, it might be reading a textbook chapter and returning to your essay later. For a psychology professional, you might want to check out some continued professional development course and then return to typing up your client's reports later. And to be honest, I sometimes think to myself that looking for continued professional development courses is almost as bad as holiday, because some of them seem so interesting. It's just the price can put you off a little bit. Self-compassion. A final tip is very simple. Just be kind to yourself. Sometimes we give ourselves so much grief for no reason, or we think that we need to make a decision there and then when we don't. For example, when I got a bit depressed about my first university project, there was no reason for me to get depressed about it. It wasn't my fault, and I was trying my best for the project. For the driving example, I just hadn't driven for months because of the lockdown. So of course I was going to be bad. Overall, whenever you're faced with a problem that's getting you down, just be kind to yourself and maybe check out some self-compassion techniques to help you. Since sometimes you just need to tell yourself that you aren't in any danger, so you can concentrate on other things and come back to the problem later. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that you got something out of it. Like when you're in a procrastination cycle, you really do just need to break it. It's a lot harder than it sounds. So if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And please check out Clinical Psychology. It's an absolutely brilliant book that I really do recommend, and you can buy it from all the usual places. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.